The sun had barely risen over the rugged mountains when the SEAL team found themselves in a nightmare scenario. The mission had started with confidence. Years of training and experience had prepared them for almost anything. Yet nothing could have prepared them for what lay ahead. They were deep inside enemy territory, surrounded on all sides by forces they hadn't fully anticipated. The air was thick with tension, every rustle of the wind through the trees setting nerves on edge. Every shadow seemed like a threat, and every distant sound made hearts race. From the moment they had landed, the SEALs had moved quickly and silently, sticking to their training, relying on each other's instincts, and following the plan they had studied countless times. But soon, it became clear that the situation was far worse than anyone had imagined. Enemy fighters emerged seemingly from nowhere, surrounding them, and cutting off the routes they had planned for extraction. The SEALs tried to communicate with their base, but signals were weak, and interference made their messages slow and unreliable. Every second that passed felt like a lifetime. The team moved cautiously, trying to maintain the upper hand, but the terrain worked against them. Jagged rocks, narrow paths, and dense vegetation slowed them down, and the enemy seemed to know the land better than they did. The SEALs' training told them to adapt, to improvise, but the situation was pushing even their limits. They had faced tough battles before, but nothing like this. The enemy wasn't just aggressive, they were relentless, using every trick, every hidden advantage, and every opportunity to strike at the team. Amid the chaos, the leaders of the team tried to keep their men focused, calm, and coordinated. Orders were shouted, hand signals exchanged, and everyone moved as one. But the enemy's numbers were overwhelming. The SEALs' weapons were powerful, their skills unmatched, but they couldn't be everywhere at once. Each second brought new dangers, and they could feel the pressure mounting. Fear, exhaustion, and frustration started to creep into even the most disciplined minds. The team knew that their only hope was to hold their position until help could arrive. They dug into whatever cover they could find: rocks, small ridges, and even the shallow crevices of the mountainside, and tried to create a defensive perimeter. Bullets whizzed past them, and the sound of explosions shook the ground. Some SEALs were hit, though fortunately not critically, but it was enough to shake everyone's confidence. They were trained to stay calm under fire, to push through pain and fatigue, but this was testing them in a way nothing else had. As the battle dragged on, time seemed to slow. Every move had to be calculated, every breath measured. They needed reinforcements, but no backup was coming, at least not yet. Radio messages crackled with static, and reports from the reconnaissance drones above were limited. The SEALs could feel themselves running out of options, trapped in a deadly trap that seemed to tighten with each passing minute. They were trained to never give up, but even the strongest resolve started to waver when faced with such overwhelming odds. Despite the fear, there were moments of courage and brilliance. One SEAL risked his position to cover a teammate's retreat. Another used his knowledge of the terrain to lead a small group to a slightly safer position. The team relied on each other in ways that went beyond training. They trusted instincts, understood each other's strengths, and silently encouraged one another to keep fighting. Yet even these acts of heroism couldn't change the stark reality. They were running out of time and options. As the sun climbed higher, the enemy pressed harder. The SEALs realized that if help did not arrive soon, they could be overrun. The mission, which had begun with precise planning and confidence, was now a desperate struggle for survival. Every second counted, and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. It was in that moment of sheer desperation, with hope fading and morale at its lowest, that a single thought spread among the team. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't completely alone. Somewhere above them, something or someone might change the course of the battle. But for now, all they could do was hold their ground, stay alert, and trust that fate had not yet abandoned them. Every heartbeat, every breath, and every bullet counted as they waited in tense silence, unsure of what the next moment would bring. Far above the chaos on the ground, a fighter jet sliced through the morning sky, its engines roaring like a beast in flight. Inside the cockpit of the A-10 Warthog, the pilot sat focused, every muscle tense, every sense alert. She had trained for countless scenarios, but nothing compared to the reality she now faced. The mission was dangerous, the stakes life and death, and she knew that even a small mistake could cost the lives of the soldiers below, or her own. She had been briefed about the situation only hours earlier. A SEAL team was deep behind enemy lines, surrounded by hostile forces, and their extraction had become uncertain. The team had already engaged in firefights and was desperately clinging to survival. The reports were grim, and most people doubted that any support could reach them in time. But she didn't doubt herself. She knew what she was capable of, and she knew that she had to act quickly. Every second wasted could mean another soldier lost. The sky above the battlefield was clear, giving her a perfect view of the rugged terrain below. Mountains, narrow valleys, and thick vegetation stretched as far as she could see. The enemy had taken advantage of this terrain, positioning themselves strategically to trap the SEALs. From this height, she could see the bullets whipping through the air, the explosions shaking the earth, and the small, desperate movements of the soldiers trying to survive. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with determination. She began to plan her approach. The mission was risky. She had to fly low enough to strike accurately, but high enough to avoid enemy anti-aircraft fire. She needed to identify key targets without endangering the SEALs below. Every calculation had to be precise. She reviewed her maps and notes, recalling past experiences in combat zones, and visualized the perfect route to provide maximum support. Precision, speed, and timing were everything. The pilot felt a surge of adrenaline as she closed in on the battlefield. Her hands moved confidently over the controls, adjusting speed and angle, her eyes scanning for the first sign of the SEALs. It wasn't just about attacking the enemy. It was about protecting lives. She had seen too many missions fail because support arrived too late. Today, she promised herself that would not happen. She would not let anyone down. Suddenly, through the haze of smoke and dust, she spotted them. A small group of soldiers moving cautiously through the terrain, exchanging fire with the enemy. They were the SEALs. Their movements were calculated, precise, but exhaustion and desperation were evident. She knew they were pinned down and vulnerable. Her jaw tightened as she realized the gravity of the moment. She was their only chance for survival. She radioed to her command center briefly, confirming her position and mission plan. They could only offer limited guidance. The decision to act decisively rested entirely on her. Without hesitation, she engaged the A-10's weapon systems, preparing to unleash a combination of firepower that would disrupt the enemy and provide the cover the SEALs desperately needed. As she descended toward the battlefield, the roar of the engines became deafening. Her heart raced, but her mind was steady. She had trained for this, the speed, the intensity, the need to stay calm under life-threatening pressure. She could see the enemy positions now, entrenched in the hills and behind rocks, aiming at the soldiers below. Every second she waited could cost lives. She made her move. The A-10 thundered into action. Explosions erupted as she fired, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. Enemy fighters scattered, disoriented by the sudden, overwhelming attack from above. Below, the SEALs could hardly believe what they were seeing. The aircraft was not just a weapon, it was hope incarnate, a force that shifted the momentum in an instant. Her actions gave them the chance to regroup, to catch their breath, and to plan their next moves. Even with the chaos, she remained calm and precise. Every missile, every burst of gunfire was calculated. Her training guided her, but it was her courage and determination that made the difference. She could see the relief in the SEALs' faces as they realized that someone was fighting for them from above. She was their guardian, their unexpected ally, and she knew that the lives of these soldiers depended on her skill and bravery. In that moment, high above the battlefield, she understood something profound. It wasn't just about fighting or survival. It was about hope. Hope that even in the darkest, most desperate moments, one person could change everything. And she was that person today. The roar of her aircraft became a symbol of that hope, a promise that the SEALs were not alone. As she prepared to dive deeper into the fight, she didn't think about recognition or reward. Her focus was clear. Protect the soldiers below, turn the tide of battle, and ensure that they all made it home alive. Every maneuver, every shot, every calculated risk was a testament to her courage and skill. And far below, in the midst of chaos and fear, the SEALs began to feel that spark of hope rekindled. A hope that would soon change the course of their mission entirely. The SEALs fought with every ounce of strength they had left. The enemy was relentless, pressing from every direction, firing from hidden positions in the rugged mountains and thick foliage. Each shot forced the soldiers to duck and roll, to dive for cover behind rocks and ridges. But the relentless hail of bullets made even the safest spots feel like death traps. The sun beat down on them, sweat mixed with dust on their faces, and yet they had to keep moving, keep fighting, and keep thinking, or they would not survive. The SEALs were trained for the impossible, but this battle was pushing them beyond every limit they had ever faced. The sounds of gunfire, explosions, and shouted commands blended into a chaotic roar that made it hard to think. Every moment felt like a lifetime, every breath a struggle. Even the most experienced warriors began to feel the creeping weight of fear and exhaustion. They had trained for war, but nothing had prepared them for the feeling of being completely surrounded, knowing that the enemy was closing in and that the clock was ticking faster than they could count. Some soldiers were injured, yet they refused to be left behind. Blood stained their uniforms, and pain shot through their bodies with every movement. But they continued to crawl, to fight, and to cover each other. One SEAL dragged a wounded teammate behind a boulder, shielding him from the enemy's fire, while another fired back with unrelenting focus. Each action was a mixture of skill, instinct, and sheer determination to survive. Every second counted, and any hesitation could be fatal. As the battle continued, the team began to realize that their usual tactics weren't enough. The enemy was not just attacking, they were coordinating, anticipating moves, and exploiting every weakness. The SEALs' training had taught them to adapt quickly, but this was unlike anything they had encountered. Even the leaders, who had been in countless firefights, felt the tension mounting. They shouted orders, tried to maintain coordination, and gave encouragement, but inside, they knew that without support, survival was slipping further away. The terrain itself seemed to conspire against them. Rocky cliffs, narrow paths, and dense foliage slowed their movements and limited their options. Every step forward was dangerous, and retreating was equally risky. The soldiers had to make split-second decisions, balancing the need to fight with the need to stay alive. One wrong move could trap them completely, yet they pushed forward, relying on years of training and their unwavering trust in each other. Amid the chaos, moments of courage shone through. A SEAL ran across an open patch of ground to retrieve a fallen comrade, risking enemy fire with every step. Another soldier, despite a painful injury, continued to provide cover fire, protecting the team as they moved to a slightly safer position. These acts of bravery were small victories in a battle that seemed impossible, and they reminded everyone that even in the darkest moments, courage could still shine. The team's communication became fragmented under the constant pressure. Radios crackled with static, and messages were delayed or lost entirely. They had no certainty about reinforcements, and every passing minute felt like it stretched into an eternity. The SEALs relied on hand signals, instinctive coordination, and a deep understanding of each other's movements. They had trained together, fought together, and now they depended on that bond more than ever. Each soldier was a lifeline to the next, and losing one could endanger the entire team. Despite exhaustion and fear, the SEALs refused to give in. Their mindset was simple: survive, protect each other, and keep fighting. Each bullet fired, each movement made, was done with precision and determination. They knew that if they could hold their position long enough, help might arrive. Every second they survived was another second closer to salvation. But the enemy's pressure never let up. As the day wore on, it became clear that their situation was critical. The SEALs had slowed the enemy, but they hadn't defeated them. Casualties were increasing, ammunition was running low, and fatigue gnawed at their bodies and minds. Even the strongest warriors began to doubt whether they could hold on. The desperation was tangible, hanging in the air like smoke from the ongoing explosions. They could feel that without intervention, They were at risk of being overwhelmed completely. And yet, even in the darkest hour, they continued to fight. Every soldier relied on instinct, training, and the unspoken trust they had in one another. They moved as one, covering each other, adjusting positions, and refusing to give the enemy any advantage. Their resilience was remarkable, a testament to their training and determination. Still, deep down, each of them knew that survival depended on something more, something outside of their control. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, burning down on the battlefield, the SEALs held their ground with everything they had left. Fear and courage coexisted within them, creating a tension that was almost unbearable. They were warriors in every sense of the word, but even warriors have limits. And as they braced for what could be the final moments of their mission, a small, distant rumble reached their ears, an unfamiliar sound that cut through the chaos and filled them with a glimmer of hope. It was faint, but unmistakable. In that instant, a spark of belief returned. Perhaps they weren't completely alone. Perhaps, just perhaps, something or someone was coming to turn the tide. For now, they continued to fight with every breath and every bullet, holding on to that fragile thread of hope. Every heartbeat, every movement, and every second mattered as they waited, tense and alert, for what might come next. High above the battlefield, the A-10 Warthog sliced through the sky, its engines growling like a predator on the hunt. The pilot's eyes scanned every inch of the terrain below, taking in the rugged mountains, narrow valleys, and dense patches of forest. From this height, the chaos on the ground looked almost like a map, with the SEALs' small movements barely visible among the smoke and dust. Every detail mattered: the location of enemy fighters, the safest paths for the SEALs, and the perfect angle to strike without causing harm to the soldiers she had sworn to protect. She had a bird's-eye view of the entire battlefield, but the complexity of the situation made her job extremely difficult. Enemy fighters had hidden themselves in the terrain with precision, taking advantage of every ridge and shadow. Their sniper positions, machine gun nests, and improvised traps created a deadly maze for the SEALs below. The pilot knew that rushing in without a plan could turn the battlefield into a slaughterhouse. Every movement she made had to be calculated, precise, and timed to the second. She felt the weight of the mission pressing down on her shoulders. One wrong decision could cost lives. As she circled the area, she began mentally mapping the battlefield. Her training kicked in, allowing her to process the chaos quickly. She identified clusters of enemy forces, noting which positions were the most dangerous to the SEALs and which could be neutralized without risking friendly fire. She also spotted pockets of cover where the soldiers could regroup and make strategic movements. Every observation was vital. Every second she delayed could make a difference between life and death. Despite the danger, she felt a strange calm wash over her. This was what she had trained for her entire career. Analyzing a battlefield, anticipating enemy movements, and making split-second decisions that could save lives. The roar of the A-10's engines, which might terrify some, was music to her ears. It reminded her of the power at her fingertips, the potential to turn desperation into hope. She began to plan her approach. Flying too high would reduce accuracy, but flying too low would expose her to enemy fire. Every maneuver had to balance aggression with caution. She adjusted her instruments, calculated angles, and considered wind, altitude, and speed. In her mind, she ran multiple scenarios. If she attacked from the north, she could neutralize the machine gun nests. If she came from the east, she could create a path for the SEALs to move to higher ground. Every option carried risk, but she had to choose the one that maximized protection for the soldiers below. The pilot also considered the SEALs' mental state. From her vantage point, she could see the tension in their movements, the exhaustion in their bodies. They were fighting hard, but the enemy's pressure was relentless. She knew that they needed more than firepower. They needed a psychological boost, a reminder that they were not alone. Her arrival alone, her presence in the sky, could give them the courage to push back and survive. She took a deep breath and committed to her plan. The first step was to gain a better angle, a position where she could strike effectively without putting the SEALs in danger. The aircraft banked sharply, engines roaring louder as she descended toward the valley below. She adjusted the targeting systems, marking enemy positions with precision. Every second counted. The enemy was still active, still hunting, still trying to eliminate the SEALs before help could arrive. As she closed in, she noticed the SEALs maneuvering, trying to find cover and stabilize their position. Their resilience impressed her. They were exhausted, outnumbered, and trapped, yet they refused to give up. She felt a surge of determination herself. They had fought this long and hard. She would not let them fail now. Her focus sharpened, and her mind became a calm machine of calculations, strategies, and instincts. The enemy was beginning to notice her presence. Flashes of gunfire erupted toward the sky, aiming at her from distant ridges and concealed positions. Yet she remained steady, moving the A-10 with precision and speed, avoiding fire while positioning herself to strike effectively. Each maneuver was calculated, a deadly dance of altitude, speed, and angle. One mistake could be catastrophic, but hesitation was not an option. She pushed forward, her eyes locked on the battlefield below, ready to intervene in the moment that would change everything. In that moment, she understood the enormity of her responsibility. The SEALs' lives depended on her skills, her courage, and her ability to act decisively under pressure. Every second she waited was an opportunity to change the course of the battle. Her training, her instincts, and her bravery would soon collide with the chaos below, and she was prepared to meet the challenge. Above the mountains, the roar of the engines became a symbol of hope. The pilot knew that soon, the SEALs would see her not just as a jet in the sky, but as the force that could give them a second chance at survival. And with that thought, she readied herself to dive into the fight, to unleash the firepower and precision that would turn the tide of the battle and offer the soldiers below a fighting chance to live another day. The roar of the A-10's engines filled the sky as the pilot dived toward the battlefield. Below, the SEALs had been fighting desperately, pinned down by the enemy's relentless fire. Every movement, every breath, was a struggle against overwhelming odds. But now everything changed. The moment the A-10 appeared, a surge of hope rippled through the soldiers. They had been counting seconds, waiting for any sign that help might arrive. And here it was, screaming down from the heavens. The pilot didn't hesitate. She had spent long minutes assessing the terrain, mapping enemy positions, and calculating the perfect approach. Now it was time to act. With precise control, she maneuvered the aircraft, positioning it to strike the enemy without putting the SEALs in harm's way. The landscape below, once chaotic and dangerous, became a carefully analyzed battlefield in her mind. Every ridge, rock, and valley had a purpose. Every enemy position was a target. She fired the A-10's Gu-8 Avenger cannon with surgical precision. The 30mm rounds shredded the enemy's cover, scattering forces and creating openings for the SEALs to move. Explosions erupted across the terrain, sending clouds of dust and debris into the air. Bullets whizzed past the soldiers, but now they were coming from the right direction, neutralizing threats rather than endangering them. The SEALs could hardly believe their eyes. The jet wasn't just an aircraft. It was a force of nature, a guardian that had come at the exact moment they needed it most. Missiles followed, striking heavily fortified enemy positions with deadly accuracy. Bunkers collapsed, sniper nests were eliminated, and the most dangerous points of resistance were neutralized. The enemy, taken by surprise, began to scatter, unsure of how to respond to this sudden and overwhelming attack from above. The SEALs felt a shift in the battle. What had seemed like a hopeless situation now had a spark of possibility. The enemy was no longer completely in control. The tide was turning. Amid the chaos, the pilot remained focused. She could see every move the SEALs made, every position they took, and every threat they faced. Her eyes were locked on the battlefield, and her hands moved with instinct and precision, adjusting angles, speed, and weapons in real time. Every shot was calculated to maximize impact and minimize risk to her allies below. She wasn't just a pilot. She was the difference between life and death. The SEALs, now able to move more freely, began to take advantage of the openings she created. They advanced carefully but confidently, using the cover she provided to regain ground they had lost earlier. Each step they took was fueled by renewed determination. The enemy, once emboldened by the SEALs' desperation, now hesitated, fearful of the jet that dominated the sky. The soldiers could hear the roar of the engines above and feel a sense of relief and strength return to their bodies. Despite the destruction she caused, the pilot maintained control and discipline. Her focus was unwavering. She avoided unnecessary risks, ensuring that every strike was precise and deliberate. This wasn't reckless aggression. It was skillful, strategic intervention. She had trained for countless hours, but now, in the heat of real combat, her courage and judgment were what truly mattered. The SEALs noticed her every move. One of them, pinned behind a boulder, raised his head to glance at the jet above and felt a surge of hope. They had been fighting with courage and skill, but fatigue and fear had been wearing them down. Seeing her attack with such precision, watching the enemy positions crumble under her firepower, gave them the boost they desperately needed. They began to believe that survival was possible, not just survival but victory. The battle raged on, but now it was different. The A-10's presence forced the enemy to retreat, break formation, and abandon their coordinated attacks. The SEALs could advance strategically, eliminating threats that had previously seemed impossible to overcome. Every movement they made was supported from above. For the first time in hours, they could see a path forward. The pilot understood the delicate balance of her role. She had to push the enemy back without overextending herself or putting the SEALs at risk. Her timing was impeccable. She moved in bursts, striking key points, then repositioning to maintain advantage and avoid counterfire. She became a moving shield and a weapon of precision, a guardian angel who roared across the battlefield. For the SEALs, hope turned into action. They began to coordinate small attacks, moving as a team with renewed confidence. Each step forward was a step closer to survival. They could feel the tide shifting in their favor, and it all stemmed from the courage and skill of the pilot above. Every explosion, every strike, and every maneuver by the A-10 changed the battle. The hopelessness that had weighed on the team just hours before was being replaced with a determination to survive and fight back. As the pilot continued her assault, the enemy morale crumbled. Positions that had seemed impenetrable were destroyed, and the SEALs now had the space and confidence to move toward safer ground. The jet above was no longer just a weapon. It was a symbol of salvation. Its roar carried hope, precision, and the promise that they were not alone. And in that moment, the SEALs realized that their struggle was no longer one of desperation. It had become a fight they could win. The battlefield was still burning, the air thick with smoke and dust. But now, the sound that echoed across the valley was not the enemy's gunfire. It was the deep, powerful thunder of the A-10 Warthog as it made another pass overhead. To the SEALs, that sound was no longer just noise. It was hope. The pilot's precision had changed everything. What had once been chaos was now shifting in their favor. The team, though tired and wounded, could finally breathe again, even if just for a moment. The pilot circled high, analyzing the scene below. She had already cleared many enemy positions, but she knew the fight wasn't over yet. There were still pockets of resistance, fighters regrouping and trying to find cover. She couldn't let them recover. Her every movement was calm, controlled, and focused. To her, this wasn't about glory. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves in that moment. On the ground, the SEALs began to move with new energy. The moment the jet had arrived, their despair had turned into determination. They had been trapped, bleeding, and outnumbered, but now they saw a path forward. One of the team leaders shouted orders, his voice strong again, his words full of purpose. Move, cover each other. We're not done yet. They advanced carefully but confidently, using the fresh cover created by the pilot's strikes. The destroyed enemy bunkers now worked in their favor, providing paths to move closer and eliminate the remaining threats. The SEALs' movements, once cautious and desperate, were now sharp and deliberate. Every step forward felt like taking back control of their destiny. The enemy, once loud and fearless, was now disorganized. Panic spread among them. They had no defense against the relentless attacks from above. The A-10's cannon tore through their positions again, sending them scattering in confusion. Some tried to run, others dropped their weapons and hid. The balance of power had completely shifted. The SEALs could sense it. They were no longer the hunted. They were fighting back, and they were winning. As the battle raged on, moments of bravery and teamwork shone brighter than ever. One SEAL risked his life to pull an injured teammate to safety, dragging him through dirt and smoke while enemy bullets zipped past. Another climbed onto a rock ledge to get a better vantage point, calling out enemy locations to the pilot through the radio. Their voices, filled with exhaustion but also with pride, guided her aim. She responded instantly, striking those targets with deadly precision. Above them, the pilot could hear the tension in their voices, but she also heard something else. Hope. They were alive, and they were fighting harder than ever. She felt a surge of emotion that she didn't have time to process. She couldn't see their faces clearly, but she felt their trust. Every maneuver, every strike was for them. She wasn't just flying a machine. She was protecting lives that depended on her skill and courage. The teamwork between the ground and the sky was seamless now. The SEALs called out coordinates, marked enemy spots with smoke grenades, and trusted the A-10 to take care of the rest. Every time the aircraft swooped in, its powerful guns roared like thunder, shaking the ground. The sound filled the soldiers with renewed courage. It reminded them that they were not alone, that someone up there had their back no matter what. Slowly, the battlefield began to fall silent. The enemy's attacks weakened, their firepower fading with each strike. The SEALs advanced to clear the remaining areas, checking every ridge, every corner, ensuring no hidden threats remained. The tension was still high, but for the first time in hours, they could see light at the end of the tunnel. The fear that had once gripped their hearts was replaced by determination and gratitude. The pilot continued to hover above, scanning for any last danger. Her fuel was running low, and she knew she would have to return soon, but she refused to leave until she was certain the SEALs were safe. She made one final pass, scanning every heat signature, every movement, until she was sure the battlefield was secure. Then, and only then, did she radio in a calm but powerful message. "You're clear. You made it." On the ground, the SEALs looked up at the sky, their faces covered in dirt and sweat, their bodies exhausted but hearts alive. They watched the A-10 circle one last time before turning away toward the horizon. None of them spoke for a moment. They just listened to the fading echo of the engines, knowing that without her, none of them would be standing. As silence settled over the battlefield, the SEAL leader took a deep breath and looked at his team. They were battered, bruised, and bleeding, but alive. "She saved us," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. The others nodded, understanding without needing words. That sound in the sky, the roar that had once terrified them, had become the sound of hope, courage, and survival. The enemy was gone. The danger had passed, but the memory of what had just happened would stay with them forever. They had fought against impossible odds, and in their darkest moment, someone they had never met had risked everything to bring them home. High above, the pilot finally exhaled, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline faded. The mission was over, but the image of those soldiers fighting on the ground stayed with her. She didn't know their names, but she knew their courage. And in her heart, she felt proud, not for herself, but for them. They had held on long enough for her to reach them. Together, they had turned the tide of a hopeless battle. The war zone was far behind them now, but the memory of that day never truly left anyone who was there. Weeks had passed since the rescue, yet the sound of that A-10's engines still echoed in the minds of the SEALs. The team had returned to their base, received medical treatment, and been debriefed, but there was one thing they all agreed on. They owed their lives to Captain Sarah Lawson. For Sarah, life had returned to routine, or at least it seemed that way on the surface. She was back to flying missions, training new pilots, and maintaining her calm, professional image. But inside, she carried the memory of that mission like a scar she could not see. She remembered every radio call, every moment of fear in those soldiers' voices, and the relief she felt when she saw them finally lifted to safety. It had changed her, even if she didn't say it out loud. One morning, Sarah received a message from her commanding officer. "Report to the main briefing room at 0900, it said. She assumed it was another mission briefing, but when she walked in, the entire SEAL team she had saved was standing there, dressed in uniform. For a moment, she froze in surprise. She hadn't expected this. Chief Reynolds stepped forward, his face serious but his eyes warm. "Captain Lawson," he began. "We requested this meeting. We never got the chance to thank you properly." Sarah tried to smile, but words didn't come easily. "You don't have to thank me," she said softly. "You were doing your job. I was doing mine." Reynolds shook his head. "No, ma'am. What you did was more than a job. You saved us when everyone else had given up. We were surrounded, wounded, and running out of time. Then your jet appeared out of nowhere, and everything changed. That sound. It meant we had a chance again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small patch, the insignia of their SEAL team. "We don't give this to outsiders," he said, "but we want you to have it. You're one of us now." Sarah looked at the patch in his hand, her throat tightening. She had received medals before, awards for bravery and service, but this felt different. This wasn't an official honor. It was personal, real. She took the patch carefully and held it close. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This means more than you know." The room fell silent for a moment. The SEALs stood tall, proud and respectful, while Sarah felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel, emotion. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was part of something bigger. After the ceremony, they all sat together, sharing stories, laughter, and memories. The SEALs told her what it had looked like from the ground, how they had almost lost hope, how her first pass had felt like a miracle, how the roar of her engines had drowned out their fear. She listened intently, sometimes smiling, sometimes silent, as she imagined what they had gone through. Later that evening, Reynolds found her outside, sitting near her aircraft. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and red, and the A-10 glowed softly under the fading light. "You know," he said, standing beside her, "most people think heroes are fearless, but out there it's not about being fearless. It's about not giving up, even when you're scared." Sarah nodded slowly. "You're right," she said. "I was scared too. I just couldn't let it stop me." Reynolds smiled faintly. "That's what makes you one of us." From that day on, the SEALs and Sarah stayed in touch. They trained together sometimes, shared mission updates, and even visited each other's bases. There was a bond between them that went beyond rank or uniform. It was built on trust and survival. Months later, during a military ceremony, Sarah's name was called before a large audience. She was being honored for extraordinary courage under fire. As she walked to the stage, the crowd clapped and cheered, but her eyes found the SEAL team standing in the back. They weren't clapping wildly or shouting her name. They simply stood with their heads high and saluted. That meant more to her than any medal ever could. When the ceremony ended, reporters rushed to ask her about the mission. "How did it feel to save those men?" one asked. Sarah thought for a moment and replied, "They saved themselves. I just helped them finish the fight." That answer spread across the media, but few understood the depth behind her words. For Sarah, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about the bond created in that moment, when courage met desperation and turned into survival. Years later, when she had retired from active duty, Sarah kept the SEAL patch framed on her wall. Every time she looked at it, she remembered that day. The roar of the engines, the cries over the radio, and the feeling of seeing those helicopters lift off safely. Sometimes, she still dreamed of that valley, the smoke, and the danger. But in those dreams, she always heard one thing: the sound of her jet cutting through the sky, powerful and unstoppable. The SEALs continued their missions, carrying the memory of the angel in the sky, who had once saved them. Whenever they were sent into danger, and things got rough, they would sometimes say over the radio, "Let's make her proud." It became their way of remembering the woman who had turned their darkest hour into a story of courage. Sarah never saw herself as a hero, but to them she always would be. In their eyes, she was the pilot who refused to give up, the one who roared back over the battlefield when all hope was lost. And so, even years later, her story lived on in whispered conversations, in training camps, in the hearts of those who had been there. The legend of that day grew, not just as a story of war, but as a story of faith, bravery, and the power of one person's decision to not give up when everything seemed lost. Because sometimes, hope doesn't come with words or promises. Sometimes, it comes with the thunder of wings above a battlefield, and the courage of one soul who dares to return when everyone else believes it's already too late.